Thanks, Julie. Welcome everyone to this Scotland branch, IIRSM Scotland branch meeting and webinar. We're not going to do too much housekeeping because obviously Julie's already been through that. It's a welcome from me as the Vice Chair of the committee to this Scotland branch webinar and meeting. We're just sort of setting the scene here as a newly formed committee, and I'm delighted that Raymond Bone is joining us this evening to talk about CDM managing contractors. And the webinar, we hope you'll get some information from it. Aims to inform you what you must do to comply with health and safety law when you use contractors. Ray is very experienced and is our Managing Director for Abbey Construction Consultants Limited, works with a team of safety professionals and is, I would say, a CDM expert, currently responsible for advising clients on health, safety and environment, and involved in lots of different multi-million-pound projects. So before I hand over to Ray, I just want to let you all know that we have another webinar we're delighted to promote coming in June. On the 21st of June, we'll be delighted to welcome Karen McDonnell, who is the head of ROSPA Scotland, and she'll be delivering a webinar on driving risk at work. So if you haven't already signed up for that, we'd be delighted to welcome you to that webinar too. Without further ado, Ray, I'm going to hand over to you if you'd like to do an introduction, introduce yourself, and I look forward to hearing the webinar with you.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. So I'll move on to my next slide, which is my introduction slide. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to deliver a presentation. So who am I? I was the lead construction officer for a local authority, looking after around £200 million worth of projects, providing both CDM advice and health and safety advice to various project managers, principal contractors, and designers. In 2015, which was the last year of the CDM Coordinator, I was awarded the CDM Coordinator of the Year by the Association of Project Safety. I've got 30 years experience in civil engineering construction management. As Vicky said, I'm currently the Managing Director for Abbey Construction. I lecture at the University of Hull on the NEBOSH diploma on the year 4 of the BSc degree, and I'm also supervisor for a master's degrees in occupational health and safety management and PhD supervisor. I currently sit as a member of the board of directors for the Association for Project Safety, and I am their president-elect, so I take up that post in October. So this presentation aims to inform you of what you must do to comply with health and safety law when using contractors. However, it doesn't apply to temporary or agency workers. There is more specific information about that on the following link as on the slides, and I'll share the slides with IIRSM, so they'll be available if you want them. So contractors, who and what are they? Well, contractors are professionals who provide a skills or a service to companies for a set period of time. They may be contracted for a set number of hours, a certain time frame, or for the duration of a project. Contractors can be self-employed people, or they can work independently as sole traders, or they can run their own limited company. Independent contractors work for themselves and source their own clients. However, an umbrella company or agency can also employ contractors. Those who work for a company may not have to find their own clients, as they can work with clients sourced by the company. The company will also pay the contractor and their taxes. Whether employed or independent, contractors can work on one or multiple contracts at a time. And with transferable skills, contractors can often work with a variety of businesses. What does the Hsc say? It says regarding the construction industry, there have been significant reductions in the number and rate of injuries over the last 20 years or more. Nevertheless, construction remains a high-risk industry. Although it accounts for only 6% of employees in Britain, it does account for approximately 30% of fatal injuries to employees. Construction accounts for the second greatest number of fatal injuries in the industry sectors, just slightly behind agriculture. And over 10% of reported major specified injuries in 2018-19 where 30 people were killed. I have got some more specific accident statistics later. So client responsibilities. I've said both you and the client, because most people work for a client, so both you and the client and a contractor you use have responsibilities under health and safety law. Everyone needs to take right precautions to reduce the risks of workplace dangers to employees and members of the public. Make sure everyone understands the part they need to play in ensuring health and safety. The client organisation would need to make somebody competent to be responsible for informing the contractors of the site rules, what the procedures are on that site, permitted working hours, any areas that are prohibited, permit to work. So some of my clients say anybody working on their sites has to use their permit to work systems, and some clients say principal contractors or contractors have to operate their own permit to work systems. And the need for this information to be passed to any subcontractors which are brought on board by contractors. So what do they need to do? You'll need to satisfy yourself that the contractor you choose can do the job safely without risks to health. This is part of a lecture I deliver at the University of Hull, where we'll look at the stage 1, 2 and 3 competence and resource checks, and I'll go through those in slight detail later. This means making inquiries about the competence of the contractor, organisation or individual. Do they have the right combination of skills, experience and knowledge? That would be the stage 1. So the stage 1 is looking at the organisation. Stage 2 would be looking at the degree of competence for everyone required, which will depend on them work activities. So stage 2 is mainly looking at the individual's competence. So for the stage 1, you would look at insurance, members of Safe Contractor, Cscs, etc. For the individual one, you'll be looking at CSCS cards or ECS cards or PASMA cards, etc. Or equivalent to them where people don't hold the relevant cards. Similarly, the level of inquiries you make should be determined by the level of risks and complexity of the job. So the more higher the risk, the more complex the work, then the deeper your inquiries should be until you feel you're satisfied. Also, the need for public liability insurance. Now, I know using various portals, I've done it myself where I've looked on the Cscs website and it's telling me the insurance for this organisation has expired. I've contacted the company and they've sent me an email which they sent to Cscs 2 months previously with their updated insurance. It's just took some time for that to be updated. So although it's a good resource, you should double check that with the individual contractors. And of course, it's for the right level. Whatever your client is stating a level, can be 10 million, 5 million, 3 million, 1 million, etc. And again, that would depend on the level of complexity and the level of risk of that project as to what level of insurance your client would be requiring. Make sure it's in date. If it's due to expire during the project deliveries dates, start to finish dates, if it's going to expire in the middle, you need to make a note so you can ask for that update prior to it expiring. Also checking any tasks that are covered by the insurance and the required levels of cover. So what we mean by that is some people are practicing as principal designers, but their insurance isn't covering them for acting as a principal designer. So you need to check what their insurance is covering them for is indeed covering the work you want that contractor to undertake. Also reviewing the HSE's register of convictions and notices. I put a small screen print on there showing you what that is, but again, I'll cover that later. You also need to identify all aspects of the work that you want the contractor to do. I'm sure you're as familiar as I am, where a tender will go out and then that package seems to grow once that tender's been awarded. So try and get everything you can into that tender. Consider the health and safety implications of the job or task. So who they're putting at risk, what areas are they working in? Have they got any defined parameters of where they can work, where they can't work? Remember, the level of risk will depend on the nature and complexity of the work. Some people look at it as a monetary value, some people look at it an area value, some people look at it a risk value. To be competent, you should be looking at all areas. You should provide potential contractors with information and make sure they know and understand the performance you expect of them. So if you're expecting them to wear certain specific PPE, i.e. in the food industry, so hairnets, snoods, etc., then you need to tell them that and where to get them from. If it's a construction site and they need specific PPE, steel toe protectors, high-vis jackets to class 1, class 2, etc., again, you need to make them aware of that. You could include this information in a job spec, a client scope, or a project description. Any site accidents which require reporting under the RIDO regulations, who do they go to report them to? Are they reporting them themselves and then making the client aware? Is that the procedure? Or are they going direct to the client for them to do the notification if it's a 7-day reportable? If it's not, it's a 3-day, it still needs to be recorded. You may need to consider contractors, subcontractors who may not fully understand the English language. A lot of the sites I'm looking after, English isn't their first language. In them instances, we insist as an interpreter, some signage or site rules is put up in pictorial formats around the site. So perhaps a person wearing a hard hat with a green tick, etc. Red crosses where the can't smoke or no smoking areas, that type of thing. And remember, if the work is construction or building work, as a client, you have duties under the CDM regulations, which is L153, and I put a picture of that on there. It's freely available from the Hsc's website. You can purchase a copy if you want a hardback. If you want to download a PDF copy, it's free to download. So I've listed here some typical questions that I ask and suggest you ask if you're not already doing so. So some questions would be, what arrangements have you got for managing the work? So for example, who will be responsible? So who's the responsible person? Site foreman, site supervisor, site manager. How will the work be supervised? At what frequency? Who will be doing it? How qualified are they? What frequency will that be done? Is there any formal records taken? What checks do you make on equipment and materials? Will they be bringing subcontractors? And if so, how will they check they're competent? What are their competence and resource checks on their contractors stroke subcontractors? That level of competency for subcontractors will also depend on the risk and complexity of the work, as it will for the contractor or principal contractor. What is their recent health and safety performance? For example, what's their accident statistics or cases of ill health over a certain period? That could be a 6-month period, a year, 2 years, 3 years. Again, the more in-depth, high-risk work would dictate whether I was asking for 6 months or 3 years. Has the Hsc taken any action against you? Now, I have been advising some clients to be cautious on this one. Some people ask in a competence and resource form, have you had any prosecutions by the courts against you? Of course, we can check that on the Hsc's register, which I'll go into later. But also fee for intervention. You need to remember Hsc can issue fee for interventions for not complying with legislation, acts, regulations or orders before they look at or before they take any prosecution. So it's 2 separate entities. So if you're asking for have you been recently prosecuted or in the last 5 years, the next question should be, have you suffered any fee for interventions? The reason that's relevant is if you're taking on a contractor to do some work at height and they've been prosecuted, a successful prosecution by the Hsc for failures in working at height, which has led to an injury or an incident, why are you then employing them? And that's not a reason to dismiss them if they have had a prosecution, because in my experience, some organisations that have suffered a prosecution tend to have better, more robust procedures in place for making sure these type of things don't happen again. But it's certainly a really good point to bring them in for an interview and ask them what went wrong, what have you done to put it right, how are you managing that, has that reduced your statistics, is the safety culture improved, etc. So don't simply dismiss them, but it's certainly a good opportunity to bring them into question. Ask if they've got a written safety policy. Is that statement of intent signed within the last 12 months by the most senior person in the organisation? So that will give you an indication as to whether they're managing health and safety well. And remember, this is only a requirement if there's 5 or more people employed. Can they provide any existing risk assessments, which is done for similar projects? And I say similar projects, I've asked for risk assessments for people working at height, and I've been on roofs, replacing roof sheeting, and I've been given a risk assessment for excavations. It's not the same, it's not what I want to see. Don't just take that risk assessment as well, please review that risk assessment. You know, I've looked at some risk assessments where they've got the risk rating of 4 times 4 is 12. Which it's not, it's 16, but it then starts to ask you questions in your own mind. How competent are the people doing this? If it's a one-off, fair enough, but if it's happening 3 or 4 times through that risk assessment, you start to question the competence. Also look at the controls, and do the controls from that risk assessment fall in line or similar to the controls you're currently operating as a client within your own organisation. There may be amendments needed, but without reading it, you're not fulfilling your duty. Again, as with the policy, a risk assessment will only be required if there's 5 or more people employed. What qualifications, skills and experience do they have in this type of work? So how many similar type projects have they undertaken? What was the results? Did they start and finish on time? Was there any incidents, accidents? Any prosecutions, any fee for interventions? Did the work go well? Can they provide you with any contact details for references on any similar past projects? And again, follow those through. What health and safety information and training do they provide to their workers? So ask for a training matrix for their organisation, especially for the people who will be doing the work on your site. So you can satisfy yourself that the individuals are competently trained in the activities to which they're performing on your site. And if required, do they have employers' liability compulsory insurance? And again, as with the previous slide, make sure that's in date, make sure it's covering the activities that the organisation is providing for you. So I put some case studies on this slide just to reinforce some of the points. So this one was a tree surgeon. He was felling a branch. He fell into a neighbouring garden, damaging a fence panel. An hour earlier, the occupiers had been in the garden playing with their 20-month-old child. The tree surgeon had neither the qualifications to use a chainsaw nor the skill to carry out the job safely. If the property developer who hired the tree surgeon had checked that he was competent or not to carry out the work, this incident would have been avoided. Don't just assume somebody is competent, check that yourself. So competence, what is competence? It's the makeup of skills, knowledge in that relevant field, the ability and attitude, training, and experience. I've tried to gauge the bubbles in some kind of priority order. All of these link together to form that one document of competence. Okay, so I said about the stage 1, 2, and 3. This is a system I use all the time. It tends to work for me. Stage 1 is an application to the company's approved contractor list. Again, there are warnings within that. If they're coming off an approved framework, then you need to make sure that they've got the necessary skills in the task that you're asking them to perform. So they're not just on that framework as a general, they'll have specific skills. You need to make sure them specific skills cover the tasks you are asking them to do. The company would check their suitability. If approved, the company should then reevaluate at regular intervals. Now, some of these frameworks are 1 year, 3 year, 5 years. Insurance expires, safe contract to Cscs expires. So as a competent framework manager, you would be looking at them expiry dates, flagging them up in Excel so that it'll turn a cell red and bring it to your attention once them documents are due for renewal. So that's the company. Stage 2 is evaluation is done. So once you've identified a project, you've picked the organisation that's got the skills relevant to the parameters of that project, you would then issue some kind of pre-construction information. It could range from half of a page, quarter of a page, up to a 30-40 page document, obviously pending the monetary value, the duration and the risk of the project to be undertaken. That pre-construction information should be shared as part of a tendering process. If you're not going to tender, then it should still be shared. That should be highlighting the times, the durations, a management organogram, responsibilities, what the work is, the area it's involved in, is it a populated area, is it a vacant building, what's the risks in that building from the client activities, such as forklift truck movements, interaction with vehicles and deliveries, etc. So it should capture all that. If it's not a construction project, you should still be given a scope, what contains that information to the contractor, so he knows what he has to face or he's going to be dealing with on that site. And this stage should be repeated for each new project, as variations in the PCI will occur. Not necessarily PCI, but the scope as well. So as the job changes, variations occur, additional work gets added on, that scope should be updated to reflect all what I've already spoke about. Stage 3, so this is the Hsc's prosecutions register. As you see, a check should be made on this prosecutions register. I've put the web address on there. Now on this you can go back 1 year, 5 years or 10 years. You use the drop down box, put the contractor's name in and it will give you, if there is any, it will bring them up in a list here. So this one you can see is mailing attractions. This was the unfortunate young lady who had a leg amputated after the fairground ride collided. I've already mentioned some of the safety scheming procurements and individual CSCS cards. So there's the Cscs, there's the safe contractor, there's construction line, etc., etc. That's for organisational competence. For individual competence, there's the CSCS card, which verifies or identifies the required training that you've undertaken, your qualifications, and because it's dated, it'll give some level of experience for that type of work that you're going to be carrying out. One what's quite often missed is the PAS 91 plus A1 2017. Although it's due to expire this, I think, in 2025. But the reason I still use this is there's a standardized pre-qualification questionnaire. It's been developed to reduce the need for suppliers to complete a variety of different pre-qualification questionnaires. And in some cases for the same clients. It's been developed by the BSI, but it's got a question set which is being commissioned by the government. So it's recommended common minimum standard for construction procurement. So if you are looking at procuring for a construction, if you go to that document, paragraph 60, there's a set of questions in there which you could copy onto a Word document and send out and ask your potential or tendering contractors to complete and send back. Another case law here, this was a painter who fell from height. He was working off a ladder and he fell more than 4 meters. Question has to be asked why he was using a ladder at 4 meters. However, he suffered a serious injury to his hip, leg and 8 fractures to his knee. The Hsc said a tower or podium steps should have been used rather than a ladder, and therefore West Lothian Council failed to properly plan and supervise the work and was fined £10,000. I have to say that these fines is the criminal side of the law from the prosecutions of the courts, and I've not considered the civil claims that would have followed these. Communication, you as the client or the client's representative and the contractor need to communicate with each other throughout the process. There's various means of doing that. So you can do that through site meetings, through daily briefings with other contractors or subcontractors, through Teams meetings, emails, phone conversations, etc. There's an array of tools out there to enable you to comply with communication section. So make sure some of that is getting done and recorded formally. Make sure the contractor and their employees have information on any health and safety risks they may face in or around your premises, such as asbestos register or an asbestos survey, demolition refurbishment or management survey. Any existing site risks that's already there on your site, which the contractor will either be exposed to or will be within close proximity to. Traffic routes, traffic speed limits, and any no-go areas, etc. Measures in place to deal with those risks. So what have you got as a client in place to deal with those risks, and what would you expect your contractor or subcontractor to put in place additionally to deal with those risks? Your emergency procedures, so what time and date do you have your fire alarm test? Where's the muster point for your fire point? What's the procedures in the event of environmental spillage or things like that? So you need to make them aware of them to comply. The information you provide should be in a form which is easily understood. Similarly, you must provide clear instructions, information, and adequate training for your own employees. Environmental considerations. Controlling pollution from air and noise pollution. This would include vibration. Working for a local authority, doing some work on some high-rise buildings, and part of that work was using a jackhammer to chisel off some areas of damp so they could reline them walls, and the vibration and noise was travelling through the wall into residents' property, which we had to deal with that. So you need to control that. Dust prevention strategy. If they're doing work, what's creating dust, which could be wood dust, which is carcinogenic, or silica dust, etc. What dust capture systems are they using? Are they electronic emulated extraction systems or dust capture systems? Is it simply putting water down to dampen it down, etc. You need to tell them what they must use or ask them what they're going to use. Managing stockpiles, so we're not causing fire hazards by stockpiling lots of material. Keeping flammable materials to a minimum and stored accordingly, so we don't want it next to a resident's walls, we don't want it next to close boarded timber hoarding. We want it in an area where arsonists can't get close to it. Waste from site, waste transfer notes, and a lot of them at the minute are going electronically, but still electronically will be records, probably a month after they've been skips have been emptied, but there's still records there. Licensed landfill, is it going to a licensed landfill? You would need to check as a client. You would have responsibility to make sure that your contractors are taking your waste to a licensed landfill. How are they going to deal with any contaminated material, waste, neutralize waste or reuse that waste, how they're going to transport, well, considering odors from that as well. Manage and maintain a quality of housekeeping, fuels, chemical storage, keeping minimum on site with bunds 110% of the largest stored on site. Implement a contingency plan should there be any spillage, so having spill kits available, closing off drains, etc. Keeping roads clean by using sweeping, road sweepers, or having wheel washing, or covering loads to prevent overspill. Appropriate machinery for site or the building conditions, and regular inspections. And I've put joint there. If you rely slowly on the contractor, principal contractor or subcontractor, and they're going to tell you they've done the inspections and there's been no issues. So I always recommend at least try one jointly and see how you go with that one. That will tell you if you need to do more. If it is a construction project, you also need to look at notifiable projects. So if the work's construction, you'll need to identify if it's notifiable. A project is notifiable if construction work is to last longer than 30 working days, with 20 people working simultaneously at any one point in those 30 days, or exceed 500 person days. And some people put person hours. I can assure you it's person days. So where a project is notifiable, the client has the duty to give notice in writing, normally ask the principal designer, but it is the client's duty to either do it or make sure it's done online using the Hsc's online notification. So I've put a couple of examples here. So exercise 1, a contractor has been awarded a contract to rewire part of a building. No other trades are required to do any work, so it's a single contractor project. The project will require only 2 people, and it's anticipated that the work will take 6 weeks working Monday to Friday. State the requirements for the project. Well, we know it's 5 working days. We've said it's Monday to Friday. We know it's 6 weeks. I've said here it's 6 weeks. So 5 times 6 is 30. So we've got 30 working days. However, we've only got 2 people. So 2 people working for 5 days times the 6 weeks is 60 person days. So we've not hit the first parameter of 30 working days because we've not got 20 people working simultaneously. And we've only got 2 people working for 60 person days, so we're less than the 500 person days. Therefore, notification is not required. However, a construction phase plan is still required, as is pre-construction information. Because it's a single contractor, we do not need to appoint a principal designer or a principal contractor, and a health and safety file is not required on a single contractor project. Example 2, you've obtained capital approval to extend your current buildings. The project is expected to require 10 people from various contractors working for 6 weeks, Monday to Friday. So again, we've got 5 days, Monday to Friday, again for 6 weeks. 5 times 6 is 30, so we've hit 30 working days. This time we've got 10 people. Times 5 days times the 6 weeks is 300 person days. So in this instance, notification again is not required because we've not hit the parameters. However, construction phase plan is required. Pre-construction information is required. Principal designer and principal contractor must be appointed in writing now because there's more than one contractor. And because there's more than one contractor, you will need health and safety file. A third and final example, you've obtained capital approval to install a new production line. The project is expected to require 15 people from 5 contractors working for 20 weeks, Monday to Friday. So in this instance, with 5 working days, Monday to Friday, working for 20 weeks equals 100 working days. We've exceeded the 30 working days, but we've not exceeded with 20 people working simultaneously, as we've only 15 people. However, 15 people times the 5 days times the 20 weeks gives us 1,500 person days. So in this instance, we've exceeded the 500 person days, therefore notification is required. Construction phase plan is required, pre-construction information is required, a principal designer and principal contractor must be appointed in writing, and health and safety file is required. So just the construction phase plan to explain here. So I told you what pre-construction information is, whether it's in a scope of works, etc. It has to be passed to any people coming to site, your contractor, principal contractor, etc. And they need to come back in reply to your pre-construction information with a construction phase plan. So that plan will set out how they're going to address those risks that you've identified, how they're going to implement on-site training, communications, daily meetings, how they're going to meet your requirements such as welfare, Schedule 2 of CDM, etc. So you set the tone and they come back and tell you how they're going to manage that site accordingly in compliance with health and safety legislation. This one was a farm worker. A farm worker received internal injuries and severe burns from electric shock when he lifted an irrigation pipe and it contacted 33,000 volts overhead power line. The employer had not discussed the presence of the overhead lines and not identified a safe way of moving the irrigation pipes. The employer should have made the contractor aware of the risks he faced and agreed a method of work before the works were started. Don't assume contractors will be aware of all risks, even if they seem obvious to you. Final case law, I think. This one was a timber frame construction of 54 houses. I put in there at the bottom, no accident occurred. This was identified by an Hsc unannounced visit to site. So basically there was driving by, saw the activity and popped in to see what was happening. Upon doing that and on further investigation, they identified there was no measures in place to prevent fire starting or spreading. Bearing in mind this is 54 timber framed houses, so they had no fire risk assessment, no fire plan, no muster point, etc. And no firefighting media. There was a lack of site management and emergency planning. There was also a risk of workers being hit by construction vehicles. So there was no traffic management plan, no pedestrian vehicle segregation. And in this instance, bearing in mind there was no accident here, but the contractor was fined £100,000 and 4,600 costs. This is why we do what we do. Deaths in construction, fatal and non-fatal injuries to workers in 2020-21, bearing in mind we was in COVID. Non-fatal injuries was 61,000. Musculoskeletal disorders was 40,000, manual handling type injuries there. Stress, depression or anxiety was over 20,000. And work-related ill health was 74,000 workers suffering from new or long-standing, averaged over a 3-year period between 2018 and 2021. You and the contractor must work together and coordinate your activities to make sure the work can be done safely and without risks to health. That's to the contractors, staff, the client staff and members of the public. One way of doing this is to have regular meetings throughout the work. The level of cooperation and coordination needed will depend on various factors. The job, what is to be done, the number of contractors, including subcontractors, which will be involved, and the risks or level of risks that will be present during that works. Decide what you need to do to manage contractors' work. The measures you put in place should be consistent with the level of risk, i.e. greater the risk, the more you need to do. Consider the following. Who will be responsible for the work and what do you expect them to do? Who will supervise the work and how from a client's perspective? How will the work be done and what precautions will be taken? What equipment should or should not be worked on or used? What personal protective equipment is to be used and who will provide it? What are the working procedures, including any permits to work, lockouts, tagouts, isolations, etc.? What are the arrangements for stopping the work if there is any serious health and safety concerns? Once the work started, make sure you keep a check on how the work is going against what you've already agreed. This can be done by carrying out regular checks. Ask yourself if the controls measures are working. Investigate if things go wrong, i.e. near misses, accidents, ill health. Ask yourselves what went wrong and what can we do to prevent it happening again. Lessons learned for future works as well as the remaining time of this project. After the job's finished, there'll be benefits in reviewing and learning from any lessons to see if performance can be improved in the future. What must contractors do? Contractors must not carry out any construction work unless they are satisfied that the client is aware of their duties. So they have a duty to tell the client, this is your duties for this works. Satisfy themselves that any contractors or designers they engage are competent and adequately resourced. A contractor must cooperate with a principal contractor if there's one appointed, and they must provide information to the principal contractor in the form of method statements, risk assessments, cost assessments, safe systems of work, etc., safe operating principles, etc. And they must comply with all reasonable directions from a principal contractor and with any relevant rules in the construction phase plan. Also, client rules, as been previously mentioned. They must plan, manage and monitor their own work, considering the risks to those who could be affected by their activities and apply the principles of prevention. Report to the principal contractor any accidents, dangerous occurrences. Principal contractor will then use the procedure previously agreed with the client for reporting to the client. Provide information for the health and safety file. Provide information on instruction, training and supervision to their employees. Preventing unauthorised entry to site, and provide suitable welfare facilities for anyone working under their control. It may be the client offers their welfare facilities. Most instances, they prefer them to be independent. So it's not just a case of providing welfare facilities, it's also a case of the cleaning, the maintenance of those, etc. This one was poor practice, work at height, scaffolding risks on hotel refurbishment site. Now, a friend of mine in the Hsc gave me these slides. For the next two slides, so I've referenced them to the Hsc. So this was poor scaffolding found during the refurbishment of a hotel. So it's a small hotel, like two houses connected together, having a small one level roof replaced. Unsurprisingly, a prohibition notice was served on this property. A roof of intermediate strength was being used as a platform on which to foot the scaffolding. At ground level, scaffolding standards were footed on loose timber boards, which were bridging and excavation. Some footing could not be examined due to the buildup of debris, and scrap timber was being used to foot scaffolds rather than proper sole plates. So there's the first picture. So what had been agreed here with the client and the contractor. And the second picture of the ground level, you can see there was some excavations where the boards had been bridged. Okay, last slide. Now we're going to some questions. This is very sad. This is the last one. This is the discussion on communication. This was welfare security guard. A client had got a client had got a contractor organisation in to provide security on a site. The security guard was working nights, 6 on a night till 6 in the morning. He had a small steel porter cabin container where he resided. His job was on the hour, every hour, to go around the site using a mobile phone to click in and monitor the four corners of the site to say he'd walk the site every hour. That was recorded. It was in the winter, it was -2, it was very cold, and his generator failed, which meant he'd lost his source of heating within that container. So he tried to ring his organisation, the contractor organisation, and got no answer. He then tried the client organisation for some support, but again, got no answer. So there was no communications in place for this security guard. He tried to use his initiative, so he walked around the site, he found a wheelbarrow, found some barbecue coals, so he pulled them into the steel container, left the door open and lit the coals to try and keep warm. He realised that he wasn't getting that warm because the door was open, it was -2, so he pulled the door to keep the heat in, fall asleep with the heat as you do when you've been out in the cold, and unfortunately died of carbon monoxide, CO2 poisoning. There was prosecution for a failure to provide a management system to protect the welfare and safety of workers. Although the fine's not significant, there are several reasons for that, and the civil claim was significant. And that's the end of the presentation. So it's a quick whirlwind tour of a minimum of what you should be doing if you're procuring or having contractors working on your sites. So I hope that's answered any expectations. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them as they pop up.
Hi Ray, we don't have any questions at the moment. Couple of requests for the slides, which are you happy for us to share those with
Absolutely.
people who want them? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody who's already messaged me, I will send you them after the presentation. If anybody else would like a copy of the slides, if you email branches@iirsm.org and I can arrange to send you a copy. I've had 2 or 3 messages saying really comprehensive presentation. Thank you. Really enjoyed your presentation, and a couple more along the same lines. Vicky, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions at all, but I would like to extend a thanks to Ray for that presentation. There was a lot of content in there, and to sort of get through it so succinctly and be able to get your message across personally for me was really useful. I learned a lot from that. Construction isn't really my background, so again, just a reminder really of the requirements of CDM and how to manage your contractors. But I think it doesn't necessarily just talk about construction, it's applying that across any contractors really, and making sure that the message is to manage them effectively, make sure that they are competent to carry out the tasks that as a client they're required to do. So really informative for me, and on behalf of IIRSM Scotland branch and as Vice Chair myself, thank you for delivering that for us. Is there anything that, you know, any common themes that you regularly see maybe as an auditor as well as a professional there that you could share with us perhaps?
So some of the most common, some of the most common ones, Vicky, is where clients are bringing contractors onto site and giving them information about the project and what they want doing, but not giving them their own site rules. So they're not saying you can't go into these areas. If you go into this area, you need to wear this specific clothing. They're not telling them that our fire alarm is held on a Tuesday at 3 o'clock. So Tuesday, 3 o'clock, the site's fire alarm system goes off, and they're either just stand there wondering what's happening, or they'll run to the muster point not knowing it's just a test because they've not been furnished with that information. Another common one is deliveries and storage areas for material, where the clients give them a welfare area but not a compound area, and all of a sudden a lorry will turn up with materials, and then there are 2 hours discussing where that can be unloaded and stored, because that's not been discussed in the beginning. And of course, it's not just a case of designating an area. That area then needs to be protected, it needs to be illuminated. Another one in some of the food industries is they will have red and yellow lines, so you can walk within a yellow line area. A red line area is for a forklift, but they're not telling the contractors which areas which they can walk in, which they can't, and there's been some near misses with forklifts incidents. And so it's just a learning curve to say, if you're a client, you want people to work on your site, you have to give them a relevant amount of information of what you're expecting off them to be able to do the work.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Julie, have we had any questions come in now at the end of the presentation there?
We've had 4 questions if you've still got time, Ray. So yep. The first one is from Peter. Do you think that more than 25 years since CDM came into force that we should be talking more about controlling designers rather than contractors? That's a controversial one.
It is a controversial one. I won't say we should be controlling them more. I would say the control starts at the design stage. So the designers should work through the principles of prevention, they eliminate, control, enclosure, etc. And what they can't eliminate, and they've got a residual risk there, that then needs to be passed on to a contractor who then has to deal with that residual risk. Some of the problems, of course, is that information isn't coming from the designer. They're not complying with the principles of prevention. They're not sharing that information. They're not putting the risks on the designs. So I think it's about equal. I see it from both perspectives.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a question from Hazel. To what lengths can a client or his representative go to check that the competent contractor is carrying out his work as per their CPP? Can they ask to review and approve all RAMs, etc.?
A client can, but then the client takes the responsibility for that. So I wouldn't recommend that. What I advise my clients is attend a meeting at least once a month, depending on the duration of the project. If it's a shorter project, then attend at the beginning And for the client to satisfy their duties, ask the relevant questions. Have you as a contractor reviewed and approved your subcontractors' risk assessments and method statements? Can I see a sample of one where you've reviewed it and approved it? Have you as a contractor undertaken a competence and resource review of subcontractors? Can I see evidence of that? So this splits into a total different conversation of client's responsibility and client's accountability. So responsibility is what a client has to do, which is a lot of what we've gone through in this presentation. Accountability is not what a client has to do themselves, but has to make sure it's being done by whoever they're bringing in to do the work. They can get independent people to come in and do site audits, site inspections on their behalf, or they can undertake it themselves if they've got the resource and the capability.
Great, thank you, Ray. And then the next question from Graham: what steps do you suggest to control third-party contracting, i.e. PC contractors then utilising contractors themselves? I'm not sure if you just answered that question already.
I think I have. I would just ask, it's not feasible for a client to review every subcontractor or contractor competence and resource. So what I recommend is that we ask, if a project's 12 months, we've got a site meeting once a month, then I'll ask for a random sample every meeting of a different one. Because what tends to happen is there might be 30 subcontractors on one month, the next month 15 of them are gone and there'll be 10 new ones. So I'll ask to see if they've done it on. So I ask continually throughout the project for evidence that the principal contractor is indeed carrying out them stage 1, 2 and 3 competence and resource checks.
Great, thank you. And then this one from Joanne, it's a comment rather than a question. Reviewing risk assessments. I received one last week that talked about a college, yet the company we were a warehousing facility. That sounds dreadful, doesn't it?
Yep, I get that all the time. I get construction phase plans that still relates to the CDM coordinator. About a year ago, I got one that actually related back to the planning supervisor, which was phased out in 2007. I get risk assessments and method statements, which is absolutely nothing at all to do with the work in hand. And when I get back in touch with them, they say, oh, sorry, we've sent you the wrong ones. I don't think you have. I also get health and safety policies for a name of an organisation. That's in a total different name of a total different organisation. And you can see, it's fairly obvious to see where it's a cut and paste job from Google, unfortunately. So I tend to send them back and say, can you send me one what's organisation specific rather than generic, please?
Thank you. One last question and then 2 comments of thanks. So this one is also from Graham. What should a contractor do if the PD has not issued, in their opinion, an adequate PCI? Have you seen this a lot? Have you seen a lot of PCIs that has not site details but just general requirements? Sorry, I didn't read that question very well. Did you?
No. That's fine. I get that. I agree with that comment. As a principal designer, I've done PCIs that's been 8 pages if it's a demolishing of a coal shed or something like that. I'm also doing work at the minute for Ministry of Defence where one PCI is over 200 pages, and that will version 16. As the site changes or new risks are identified or work changes, the PCI should be updated to reflect that. Unfortunately, not everyone's like that, and you tend to get a generic PCI what says there's a manual handling risk, but don't go into any specifics. It doesn't say what the risks are, what they'll be lifting, and what the potential weights are. A lot, in my experience, doesn't give any structural loadings, so they're saying that an air conditioning unit on the roof needs to be took off and replaced, but it's not saying what the existing unit weight is or what the new weight is, and whether we will indeed exceed the roof loading for that roof area. So yeah, I see a lot what's very poor.
Thank you, Ray. A message from Kenny. Thanks for this. The value of a control of contractors process with permits, etc., is valuable, and one which came up all the time. And one which came up all the time is contractors parking! ! And then a message from Ray. Excellent presentation, Raymond, which was pitched at the right level. I think I echo those comments. It was so comprehensive, Ray, and really helpful. Thank you so much for doing this presentation for IIRSM Scotland today. Thank you to the Vice Chair, Vicky Cutler, for hosting the webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Those who have asked for the presentation slides, I'll email those across to you. And as usual, the recording will be on the IIRSM YouTube channel after the event. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll echo those comments. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.